Good morning. And I want to invite our speakers who are present. Some are virtual, Arnold August and Arjae Red. Okay, there they are. Good morning, everyone. And power to the people. Power to the people. All right. Thank you so much. It's a cloudy day, but we need to wake ourselves up. Thank you so much for being here today at the Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz Center. I'm Margaret Kimberley, Executive Editor of Black Agenda Report, and I'm very pleased to be chairing this panel on exposing imperialist propaganda. It's very important that we acknowledge the 75th anniversary of the birth of the People's Republic of China, which is one of the most significant events in world history. However, this is a very, very difficult week as we mourn the martyred in Gaza and in Lebanon. And I want to say, someone said 40,000 dead in Gaza. Lancet says it's more like 186,000. So we're talking about, and we don't know how many in Lebanon. But these war crimes, this genocide, makes it all the more important to learn about China's accomplishments and its role in forging cooperation among nations and its efforts at peacemaking. So we have an amazing panel on this much-needed discussion on the topic of exposing imperialist propaganda. We are awash in anti-China war propaganda. Everything from tall tales about Chinese police stations and China buying up all the farmland. Of course, you know the biggest owner of farmland in the country is Bill Gates. You know that, right? So this is a very, very important topic as we are being herded. We're being propagandized into believing that China is an enemy of people in this country and that there is some benefit in having a war, a hot war, attempting to strangle China economically, and possibly even having a hot war with another nuclear nation. So let's get to it. Let's stay on schedule. I'm reminding our speakers to limit their remarks to 7 minutes so that we may stay on schedule. And I will remind when you get to 7 minutes. Anyway, so let us begin. So we have panelists who are here in person, and we have panelists who are here virtually. And we will start with Arnold August, who is someone I never met in person. We've been friends on social media. He's here from Montreal. So it's such a pleasure to welcome him to the podium. Arnold is a journalist and an author of Xizang, Eyewitness Account. Arnold August.
Thank you very much, Margaret. You hear me well? In fact, yes, it's a great pleasure to see you finally in person after all, I don't know, decades or whatever. My talk is, it's going to, in the main, based on a visual, a YouTube that I put together of 6 minutes and 45 seconds, based on our visit to, make the point as much as possible in a visual way. I was part of a select group of 6 people from different continents, one from Oceania, Australia, one from Europe, myself from North America, and 3 people from Latin America. Now, where do we visit? We visit Xizang, which is often known as Tibet, even though the real name is Xizang. And it is the Xizang Autonomous Region. And we also visit Qinghai, which is the neighboring province with a very high proportion of people of Tibetan origin. So we're ready to roll my film. Hope it's ready. Big love the film. I have nothing to say. Yeah. So here we're visiting boarding school. We know about all of the disinformation regarding boarding school. What do we see? Here it is.
I was very impressed by how huge it was, how big it was. The library, of course, me being a writer, and the quantity of books that are in the library. Of course, the football camp. So, in overall, the infrastructure of the school impressed me a lot. It has a very elevated, a very high pattern. They had Tibetan, English, Chinese, history, physics, chemistry, moral and ethics, and math, of course. And it impressed me a lot the fact that there are 3 languages.
I come from Argentina. In our country, we know that the west of China had been poor for many centuries, and Xinjiang was one of the provinces that has been poor for so long. Coming now, and I am witnessing big efforts and being materialized on poverty alleviation. I see the people that was poor not so many years ago. Now it's very, very good and very good conditions. Their children are going to school, and the life conditions, the houses, the clothes, and the conditions of the city, like electricity and water and all the services are very, very good. So this has been a very quick change, a very fast development in the sense of poverty alleviation. So I see people as better. I see a lot of dignity, and that is very moving.
China, it was so inspiring to see those young people in the schools in China. When we think back, what was the situation in China before 1949, before the liberation of China? Nothing could compare to what was the situation there to the situation now. And it was so pleasant, even though, of course, I do not speak Mandarin or Tibetan, I could not communicate. But even without communication, just by the eye contact with those students, I'm very happy to see. You can tell that they are proud of what they are doing. They are proud to be part of the Chinese Revolution. It was I would say it was one of the most inspiring portions of the visit that we have had so far, and I'm sure there will be more inspiring situations such as this in the future. Just the fact that children have not only they have the right, the possibility to go to school and up to many years for free. It makes a major change for China in the future, where you have a whole section of the population who is being educated in order to take on positions in the Chinese society, in the Chinese government, to advance the cause of the Chinese people. So nothing could be more important than education for the youth. And what I saw in that school, that it showed what China is doing. We could see it on the faces of those Chinese young Tibetan students. We could see it on their faces. They're proud about what they are doing, that they are learning, in order to be part of this amazing, I would say, one of the most important advances in the history of mankind, what China is doing now. And those youth are part of it, are going to be part of it.
This is the cafeteria in the boarding school.
And each floor can sit more than 600 students, and that means a total of 1,200 students can dine together on the first and second floor, providing a reliable, safe, and comfortable dietary right here. There's this multimedia room, like where students have access to iPads. And that room.
At one point, I asked about the possibility of using cell phones in the classroom.
That's very good. That's so friendly. Yeah. And the advantages are actually, you see, because of everybody playing cell phones, they cannot concentrate on the teacher's talks or teachers.
They have no right to bring cell phones in the classroom.
Like Tibetan class, it's very important that you learn first from the teacher, and then you should repeat or you should write down your notes, and then like rethink and reflect. It's very like methodical way of learning Tibetan.
This is the second part of the trip in Xizang, or what is also known in Tibet. We visit that special startup town for technology.
New companies, and so far we have more than 60 companies are working here in these buildings. The 3 years, the rental office is free from there. They give the office in this building. So water fees, electronic fees, and the residential fees all are governed by the government. So the young people, they can only bring the computer and start working here. They can pursue their dream here.
Yeah, so as he just finished saying, in that special tech town that was developed a few years ago, they provide everything to anyone who wants to participate. Just bring your computers and you could do anything you want to develop your own ideas, your own enterprise. So the question comes now, well, where's socialism and all that? Well, it's very, very much a part of it. In order to be allowed to have that privilege of going to that tech school or that tech enterprise, coming from the admission, in order to be allowed, you have to include adherence to the Constitution of the People's Republic of China and support for the leadership of the Communist Party of China and the socialist system. It does not say you have to be a member of the party, but you could not be expelled from the party and being admitted to the school. So that's my main point about this. Of all places in the world, there you have Chinese socialism with Chinese characteristics. The proper balance between individual initiative, at the same time, the social goals of the Chinese Revolution. For the people, young people who succeed, they also succeed in further developing socialism in China. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arnold. Excuse me. And our next speaker is virtual, Ju-Hyun. So we're going to cue that up. He's director of the China-U.S. Solidarity Network, China's Xinjiang versus U.S. on Palestine.
Greeting from Shanghai, China. My name is Ju-Hyun Li Xiaoshen from China-U.S. Solidarity Network and the National Immigrant Solidarity Network. We are community-based organizations between Los Angeles and Shanghai, China and the United States to build social justice issue to support each other for binational activist solidarity, mobilization, and the work to fight against U.S. imperialism, to stop U.S. battering China, and to support the immigrants' rights, civil rights, and human rights in the United States against the multinational corporations and the U.S. elites. We're right now in China to working on several projects to build Chinese activists' solidarity with US activists to fight against US imperialist war around the world. The endless, senseless war or proxy war in the Asia, in the Middle East, and also the sanctions across the world from Russia to the Central and South Americas. Today I want to talk why I am in China. The reason is we need to mobilize every Chinese activist and US peace activist to fight against US imperialist conspiracy against our country, from sanctions to color revolutions to military encircling. One of the key, most important current project is the so-called the Xinjiang genocide claim, which is US is totally fabricated what happened in Xinjiang. As my work as an activist, and also I have been organizing many fact-finding tours to go into the Xinjiang, and I'm physically, personally living in China, from Shanghai to going to the west part of the China. We've been witnessing many times, in details, in personal levels, what we can see, the prosperities and the safety and the kindness and the humanity across China. There's no such thing as a genocide in Xinjiang. In the region, Uyghurs, Hans, and other ethnic minorities are lived side by side peacefully and working together to build a better life and with prosperous future. In Xinjiang, we've been bringing many Western activists from US to UK to Canada. Have been for the last couple of years. We also have been producing a documentary, Voices of Xinjiang, with Sarah Founders and with Copings and other activists, witness what really happening in Xinjiang. Multi-ethnic unities, including the prosperous in economy and also the harmonic society. That's exactly what is different than what we experiencing, what I'm living in Los Angeles or New York cities, where the police brutalities, the economic crisis, the homelessness, as well as all these oligarchs using public resources to exploit the economic system for their own gain, the multinational corporation, endless greed and hunger for the money, hunger for the profit to exploit the workers and slave laborers across the US. It's also the shame that when the US imperialists supporting the genocidal Israel Zionists invade the Gaza, and also supporting the weapons and also the political maneuvering to support Netanyahu for continuing the genocide in Gaza, as well as the hunger campaign to want to stop every Gazan from no food and no medicine to death. That is the ethnic cleansing. Yet the US imperialists, include the genocide Joe, supporting this, while they shamefully claiming this is justified, while they are fabricating the so-called Xinjiang genocide claim in China, and then using that as a justification to launching countless sanctions and also racist propaganda campaign against China. I want to encourage every activist, peace-loving activist in the US and around the world can see through this, can talk to the activists in China, or you're coming to visit China, to see by yourself, to come to China, to communicate with the activists, to build a true multi-ethnic international solidarity between China, US, and the Western countries' activists. China-US Solidarity Network is going to work on this project to support to build this. Currently, we are organizing our delegations. I hope you can come to join our next delegation end of this year and the next year. We're also making a documentary called Voice of Xinjiang. That is a documentary about what we're witnessing in Xinjiang and to debunk the US and the Western myth. I hope you can join us, support our work, and we can build our solidarity to fight against the US imperialists and also the census war, their census war across the world. Because people united will never be defeated. 世界人民大团结，万岁！
And our next speaker is here with us, Arjae Red, who is a union organizer speaking on answering US propaganda on Xinjiang.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Arjae. I'm a union organizer, founding member of Starbucks Workers United in Buffalo. Thank you. I'm an anti-imperialist activist. I'm a staunch defender of the People's Republic of China and a member of Workers' World Party. And I'm very honored to be a part of this program today. I think the timing couldn't be better. Not just because we want to come together to celebrate the revolutionary history of China and the accomplishments today, but also to avoid a war that our imperialist ruling class here in the US is pushing on all fronts in Taiwan, in the South China Sea, in Xinjiang. I especially want to talk about Xinjiang because I think that this is a region of China that is most often lied about. We're told that China is committing a genocide against Uyghur people, that they're suppressing languages, different cultures, religion. We're told that China is using slave labor. This is the common narrative. The media says that what China is doing to the Uyghurs is what Israel and the United States are doing to the Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, in all the occupied land. Many in the anti-imperialist movement don't know how to respond to this. But we need to be able to tackle this head on. We can't be afraid to talk about this. So I want to talk about what I saw when I was in Xinjiang. I want to give a special thanks to Ju-Hyun and the China-US Solidarity Network. My comrade Sarah Flounders and I got to spend a lot of time in China, almost 2 weeks in Xinjiang. And what I saw was the complete opposite of what I was told by the US media. I saw economic development at a pace that most countries have never seen. I saw the creation of jobs, bringing in new industries, the creation of housing on a mass scale, public transportation, high-speed rail, things that working class people in this country don't even have, in the richest country on earth, the imperial core. Education opportunities, affirmative action practices, all of these things that China is doing to develop in Xinjiang. I saw grants for businesses. We talked to farmers, Uyghur families, Kazakh families. They explained that they had been nomadic farmers for generations and they have been receiving grants to open up new businesses, open up dairy farms, producing yogurt, producing all these products that they didn't have the means to. They didn't have the capital. And that's changing now at a fast pace. I saw a diversity of culture like I've never seen anywhere in the world. Dozens of ethnic groups that have shared this region for hundreds of years that call it home. I saw a diversity of languages being spoken. Children, school children, 6 years old, they can speak 3 different languages. I saw street signs, both, government street signs as well as on businesses, shops that had multiple languages listed. If you've got 4 or 5 different languages listed together, these are not being suppressed, they're being taught, they're being encouraged, and people are being brought together. When I was there, I saw a communist party that was attentive to the needs of the people living there, both in the rural areas as well as the urban areas. We talked to people that explained buildings that were damaged by earthquakes, historic areas of Kashgar and other cities that had to be rebuilt, and the democratic processes that went into how to rebuild it, which buildings do we restore, and things like this. You don't see that kind of a democratic input when developers in this country wipe out entire blocks, gentrify them, turn them into condos or parking lots. We talked to people who explained during the COVID crisis how the Young Communist League was going around doing food distribution, bringing groceries to people, providing them the things that they need. We talked to people in state-run farms, little villages, that explain that the Communist Party has officers in each of these villages that checks on what people need. One example I'd like to give. We met with a couple different farmers in this village, and they explained, we have these sheep and different cattle, and they get sick, and the closest veterinarian is in the city, and we can't get there. We need a veterinarian. The party took this information, they got grants together, they found people to make it happen that lived in the village, they sent them to school, they studied to be a veterinarian, they gave them the resources they needed to start up their own veterinarian practice. They're developing parts of the economy that hadn't been there, bringing Xinjiang into the future. And I asked them, okay, well, what happens if the farmers don't have enough money to get their sheep treated? And they said, well, the government will pay for it. And I realized that the sheep in China had better health care than we have here. But this is just an example. This is many examples of development and attentiveness to the needs that we saw. And the main thing that I want to talk about, the comparison to what's happening in Gaza, we have to debunk that loud and clear. Because what we see in Gaza, we all see it. We go on social media. We see destruction. We see genocide. We see an economic blockade that's been in place for years. Gaza is an open-air prison. And what does this narrative about China accomplish? Well, it justifies U.S. sanctions. People in Xinjiang that want to export their products, Uyghur-owned businesses, they're harmed by these sanctions because they can't export outside of the domestic market. Western media even appropriates the language of the BDS movement, trying to claim that it's in support of the Uyghurs, and that justifies these sanctions. But the sanctions are targeting everyday working class people, not like the BDS movement that's targeting Zionist corporations that are linked to the ethnic cleansing and destruction of the Palestinians. The goal of these sanctions is to disrupt Xinjiang, to turn people against their own government, to make the people suffer, just like the blockade in Cuba. The goal is to stoke ethnic division and separatism and try to tear apart the People's Republic of China, disrupt the Belt and Road Initiative. The same people that are spreading this narrative about China are completely fine with justifying the genocide against Palestine every single day in the news. What they are trying to do with the People's Republic of China is the same thing that they did with the USSR and Yugoslavia and every other multinational worker state that rose to challenge the power of capitalism and imperialism. And I'll be showing some of my clips from my trip during the lunch break. So thank you all for your time, and I hope you enjoy it when it gets shown. Thank you.
Thank you, Arjae. Our next presentation is virtual from Ken Hammond of the Party for Socialism and Liberation and author 75 Years of Socialism with Chinese Characteristics.
Greetings, I'm Ken Hammond. I'm a professor of East Asian and Global History at New Mexico State University. I'm a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation and an activist with the organization Pivot to Peace, working to defuse the tensions between the United States and China and create a world where we're not pivoting to Asia with American military assets, but working together for a more peaceful and prosperous world. I'm very happy to be here today as we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the People's Republic of China. And I would just like to take a few minutes here to say something about the idea of socialism with Chinese characteristics, which has been the animating principle in the history of the People's Republic and indeed in the Chinese Revolution overall over the past a little more than a century. When we think about socialism with Chinese characteristics, what we're really considering is a practical application of the ideals, the principles, the analytical methodologies of dialectical materialism, looking at the actually existing conditions in China and adapting the theoretical prospects or the theoretical propositions of Marxism, Leninism to the realities that are on the ground in China. This is a project that began with the establishment of the Communist Party back in 1921 and was a long and arduous struggle. The 1920s was a very difficult period, but finally, by the 1930s, under the leadership of Mao Zedong, the Chinese Communist Party placed itself on a successful path of revolution by understanding the idea that the peasantry were, in a sense, rural proletarians, as Mao described them, and were the natural allies of the industrial working class. That methodology, that principle, that tactical approach led to the success of the revolution in 1949, and China embarked upon its course of development since then. And these past 75 years have seen this idea of applying dialectical materialism, applying Marxism, Leninism to the real conditions of China, take us down a long and complicated path with lots of ups and downs, lots of victories, lots of failures, lots of successes, lots of defeats. It's been a tumultuous history in many ways, but one which has unfolded along a course aimed at improving the lives of the Chinese people, building a socialist future for China, and creating a system that was based on the public ownership of wealth and its application through the instrumentalities of the Chinese state to improving the livelihoods of the people and raising the standards of living and all that. From 1949 to 1976, this was a very difficult process, a process where tremendous growth was made and housing conditions, healthcare, educational opportunities, all kinds of things were improved and enhanced, but there was a lot of conflict within the party, within society, over what the best path forward was. And this was a period, of course, where culminating with the great proletarian cultural revolution, where different groupings within the party, different interpretations of how best to build socialism came into conflict with one another. That period comes to an end after the death of Mao Zedong in 1976. And since 1978-79, China has been embarked upon a path of reform and opening to the outside. That path has itself had different phases, different periods of time. There was a long period, what we might call accommodation with the West, The idea of reform and opening was that China wanted to develop its economy rapidly, to expand and enhance its productive capabilities. And in order to do that, they needed access to capital, to technology, to other kinds of knowledge and experience from the outside, from the capitalist world. And this necessitated, for a period of time, the 80s, the 90s, even into the beginning of the present century, where China accommodated itself to the global capitalist system. It went along to get the things that it needed for its own development. But about 13 years ago, China entered into what is called the New Era, at this point still under the leadership of Xi Jinping. And this is a period where we have seen China, in a sense, the Chinese people once again standing up. Mao Zedong very famously in 1949 on October 1st said the Chinese people have stood up. And as they have made their way forward and as they have struggled to build a better future for themselves and indeed to become something of a model for other developing peoples in the world, once again now the Chinese people have stood up, and they are no longer making this sort of accommodation with the West, particularly with the United States. That has led to a period of conflict, a period where the United States has become increasingly hostile and aggressive. The pivot to Asia is aimed at encircling China, containing China, and that's something that all of us who support the Chinese Revolution and support the struggle for socialist construction everywhere that it's possible, this is something that we have to fight against. The struggles against American imperialism, of course, aren't only concerned with China. Right now, of course, we know that American imperialism is aggressively asserting itself in the world in places like Ukraine, in the Israeli genocide in Gaza, and we have to oppose all of those things as well. The key to the success of socialism with Chinese characteristics is the maintenance of the socialist core in China. The new era where China is today, this era of reform and opening and the ending of the accommodation with capitalism, with Western capitalism, this is unprecedented territory. China is charting a new path every single day, and it's one in which that struggle, that effort to build a socialist future, we need to support it, we need to encourage it, and we need to congratulate the Chinese people on the wonderful things they have accomplished over the last 75 years. So as I say, it's a wonderful thing to be here today and share this moment with you. And I express my solidarity with the people of China and with all of you comrades who are here celebrating it together. Thank you very much.
And our next speaker is here with us, Ju-Hyun Park of Nodutdol for Korean Community Development, speaking on Korea, the New Cold War, and the U.S. Out of Korea campaign.
Good morning, comrades. It's a joy to be here with you today to mark 75 years of the People's Republic of China and to commemorate the world historical contributions of the Chinese Revolution. And while today is a very happy occasion, we are also meeting in perilous times. The crisis of the imperialist system has led to the outbreak of punishing wars in Eastern Europe and Western Asia. And as we speak, war clouds are gathering in East Asia under the auspices of the new Cold War. And it is our belief that the Korean Peninsula has now emerged as the most volatile flashpoint in the region. Korea today is at the highest risk of war that it has been in for decades. While it is true that since 1953, the Korean War has been in a suspended state, and while it is true that for all this time, the United States has retained tens of thousands of troops, dozens of military bases on our peninsula, there has been a significant change over the last couple of years. What I'm speaking of is changes in the political conditions within the peninsula itself, which have now deteriorated to the point that we can say we are in a new era of Korean history and therefore the history of the region as well. What is the cause of this change? To begin, the South Korean regime today has deteriorated to a more reactionary and subservient position than it has been for decades. Under the current president, Yoon Suk-yeol, the Republic of Korea has declared its right to launch preemptive strikes against the DPRK. It has also declared Pyongyang its so-called principal enemy. Last year, the Republic of Korea betrayed the masses of Korean people on both sides of the peninsula and around the world by entering into a military alliance with Japan, our first colonizer. It has also rolled out the red carpet for a massive escalation in US war threats in Korea. In 2023, US forces Korea engaged in 200 days of war exercises on our peninsula. This spring, the militaries of 12 nations were invited to participate in these barbaric war games for the first time ever. And just last month, the United States and the Republic of Korea held a series of nuclear war exercises on our peninsula, initiating rehearsals for a nuclear strike on Korea, which are likely to only grow in their complexity and severity in the years to come. So given these and other escalations, the DPRK made the momentous decision earlier this year to abandon the strategy of peaceful reunification with the Republic of Korea. The DPRK now recognizes a paradigm of two hostile states on the Korean peninsula for the first time in its history. This marks a definitive end to the era when peaceful reunification remained a possibility in Korea. The only party at the present moment that is speaking of reunification in explicit terms is the Republic of Korea, under the auspice of what it calls a new freedom-based unification doctrine. This calls for regime change in the DPRK via means of color revolution or by any means necessary. It is simply a recipe for war. So we are now in a sharper and more dangerous stage of the Korean anti-imperialist struggle. Consequently, the peninsula has now become the most volatile flashpoint in East Asia, where the contradiction between the forces of imperialism and anti-imperialism are at their highest, and therefore so is the threat of war. We must note that there has not been a single conflict on the Korean peninsula since 1895 that did not involve outside powers or eventually spiral into a regional confrontation. If the US imperialists and South Korean ruling class succeed in achieving a war in Korea, this will spiral into a regional war and likely into a global one as well between nuclear powers. These conditions raise a point of strategic concern for the world anti-imperialist movement, and particularly for those of us here in the United States. As friends of revolution everywhere, as anti-imperialists, as socialists, we have to collectively recognize the need to confront the US's military encirclement of China. We also have to recognize the particular role of solidarity with the national liberation struggles of occupied countries in the vicinity. And we have to see that there is a special role that the DPRK plays in US imperialist strategy. The United States cannot always afford politically to antagonize China because China has become a world power. However, Washington can always lean on the DPRK as a reliable scapegoat and thereby achieve the same strategic aims in the region. We have to note that the new Japan-Korea-United States alliance and the Japan-Philippines alliance were both formed citing the alleged threat posed by the DPRK as their justification. As a result, what we're now seeing is that Asian NATO is rising using the DPRK as a very reliable scapegoat, and we know that that structure will be weaponized against all the countries of our region. So it's in recognition of these facts that Nodutdol has launched the US Out of Korea campaign earlier this year. I'm very proud and happy and grateful to note that a number of the organizations in attendance today have endorsed this campaign, joining more than 60 organizations around the US that have thrown their weight behind the call for the United States to leave Korea for good. The reason we've called this campaign is to redirect the energy of the former peaceful reunification movement towards a direct confrontation with US imperialism. Since the end of Japanese colonialism, the process of decolonization and national liberation in Korea have been violently interrupted by the United States. For the past 79 years, the United States has waged a war against the Korean people, which is in actuality a war against all the peoples of Asia, all the working peoples of the world. And it's in that spirit that we recognize that this campaign is not only for Korean people, but for all progressive peoples of the United States and the world who oppose imperialism and struggle for a common future. Consequently, we've put forward the following demands, and I urge everyone here and all of you listening on Zoom to visit usoutofkorea.org to learn more. Our first demand is the full and permanent withdrawal of US troops and weapon systems from Korea and the immediate return of all Korean land, water, and airspace appropriated by the US military to the Korean people. Secondly, we demand an end to all US-South Korean alliances, including the Japan-Korea-US trilateral security cooperation. We demand an end to all US-South Korea joint command structures, the Combined Forces Command, the United Nations Command, any form in which they may take, recognizing that these primarily exist for the US to dominate South Korea militarily and use it as an appendage. Third, we demand an end to all US military exercises in Korea, all forms of war threats against the DPRK, including sanctions against the North Korea, whether they be implemented through the United States government or the UN Security Council. And fourth, we demand the US government divert spending from war, prisons, and policing. We demand housing, education, healthcare, and climate justice for working people. There are $1.5 trillion that the US expends on war alone every single year. Meanwhile, we have hurricanes buffeting Appalachia. We have homeless people in the streets of this city. We have more child poverty than we have seen in decades. We say enough is enough. Thus far, since the launch of our campaign, we have staged rallies this August, attended by hundreds of people in 3 cities, against the annual Ulji Freedom Shield US War Games in Korea, which are some of the largest military exercises on Earth. We will continue to mount and expand our resistance in the coming years. We invite everyone here to participate in that process and join us in the work of providing further education, not only to the general public, but also to the left concerning the US's role in Korea and the war threats that are emanating from it. We know that we're at a pivotal time in US politics. Many people are wondering how the outcome of this election will shape the future of this country and the world. We can't see the future, but one thing that we know for certain is that in the years to come, as the US enters its final crisis, it will only sink its teeth further into Korea as a means of achieving war in the region. So we stand ready to interrupt that process, to organize people, to mount resistance, and fight for a liberated future where we no longer have to contend with the threat of imperialism domestically or abroad. Thank you all for your time. We invite you all to pick up one of our palm cards with more information about our campaign at the table to my left. We'll be around all day, and we look forward to meeting with all of you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And our next speaker is a virtual participant, Chen Weihua, who is the EU Bureau Chief of China Daily, and speaking on China's peaceful rise and responsible foreign policy. And I urge you, if you are not on the X platform, formerly Twitter, you must read Chen Weihua's posts. They are the best. They're so wonderful. Someone even created a parody account, Victims of Chen Weihua, because he is sharp and witty and great. So Chen Weihua will join us virtually.
It's a great honor for me to speak to you here in my personal capacity at this very important event marking the 75th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. I want to first express my personal appreciation for Friends of Socialist China for your good work in advocating world peace and justice and in supporting China against the U.S. new Cold War and against its reckless smear campaign against China. Chairman Mao's declaration 75 years ago that the Chinese people have stood up, have made Chinese extremely proud of being Chinese after the nation had suffered a century of humiliation inflicted upon by imperial and colonial powers. China's rapid peaceful rise, especially since the reform and opening up in the late 1970s, is a miracle and unprecedented in human history. China has lifted 800 million people out of poverty, greatly raised the living standards of its people, advanced the capacity in education, public health, science, and technology. And China has become a global manufacturing powerhouse, including in renewable energy and other clean industries. China has been playing an important and responsible role on the world stage and as a permanent member of the UN Security Council and as a voice for the developing world. It's exactly such China's independent foreign policy, unique development path, and its rapid, peaceful rise that have made many in Washington feel threatened. And in sustaining the U.S. global hegemony, that is why U.S. has been going all out to contain China's development. The U.S. has been waging trade wars, tariff wars against China. It has put hundreds of Chinese tech companies on its notorious entity list for export control. The U.S. has been forcing countries to choose sides in its bid to divide the world into Cold War type of political blocs. The U.S. has also been provoking China in potential hot wars by boosting arms supplies to Taiwan, which is internationally recognized as part of China. The U.S. has been flexing its muscle for decades in air and sea near China's shore, not to mention its hundreds of military bases aimed at encircling China. In March this year, U.S. President Joe Biden approved a classified nuclear strategy to counter the so-called China threat. It is an invitation to nuclear arms race and poses a real threat to the existence of humanity. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg made a similar dangerous nuclear warmongering back in June. U.S. leaders, lawmakers, politicians, and even the news media have indulged in demonizing China amid a resurging Marxism in Washington. The bill passed recently by the U.S. House of Representatives to provide $1.6 billion to deliver anti-China propaganda overseas is just the tip of the iceberg of such U.S. smearing and disinformation campaign against China. U.S. often portrays China as a major threat to global peace. The truth is that China has one of the best records for peace. The U.S., on the other hand, has engaged in constant wars and regime change, from Afghanistan to Iraq to Libya, just to name a few. The U.S. still refuses to lift its more than 6 decades of cruel and inhumane embargo on Cuba, despite the condemnation by the UN General Assembly every year for more than 3 decades. The world has just witnessed the hypocrisy and double standards exhibited by the U.S. and some of its allies in the ongoing conflicts in Ukraine, and in Gaza, the US might have succeeded in dictating and influencing some countries' foreign policy. But many countries in the world have made it very clear that they don't want to be forced to choose sides, and they don't want a new Cold War. We are living in an interconnected world, and it is more important than ever for the world to come together to tackle common global challenges from climate change, nuclear proliferation, pandemic, to economic growth and global governance. It means resisting the US hegemony, opposing a new Cold War, and building a just, peaceful, and multipolar world where developing nations have a bigger and equal say. Chinese are a peace-loving nation. Chinese believe that different civilizations, countries with different ideology, political system, culture, and tradition could and should cooperate and coexist in peace. Let's work together for world peace and world justice, and let's work together against the new Cold War. Thank you very much.
And our next virtual, before I say that, Arnold August is leaving palm cards or cards on the table if you want to reach him for more information about Tibet. Our next and last speaker is also joining us virtually, Creighton Ward of the Qiao Collective. And I have to also add, Creighton did so much to make this event a reality, our lovely programs, everything, and but unfortunately can't be with us in person. So Creighton Ward of the Qiao Collective, Challenging Western Marxism.
Hello everyone, it is an honor to be joining you today to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. My name is Creighton and I am a member of Qiao Collective. Today, I would like to address and challenge the prevailing attitude of the Western left towards the People's Republic of China, beginning with a short reflection on my time in the country in 2019. 5 years ago, I was fortunate enough to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the PRC from inside the country. It was a bittersweet occasion, marking the year that the PRC surpassed the USSR in longevity. This milestone represented the endurance of China's revolutionary process and the stability of the world's largest socialist state. It also served as a reminder that the more empowered socialist China becomes, the more US imperial aggression against it intensifies. In the same year, China weathered a color revolution attempt in Hong Kong and a media blitz on Xinjiang. 2 months later, the discovery of the novel coronavirus would unleash a new wave of xenophobic propaganda and plunge the world into crisis. Back then, what brought me back to my country of origin was a desire to understand China from a Chinese perspective, untainted by the distortions of my Western bourgeois education. During my undergraduate studies, I realized that the radical theories and anti-capitalist politics I had been exposed to were inadequate to properly analyze and appreciate the PRC. After becoming disillusioned with my Western liberal arts education, I became increasingly convinced of the validity of Marxism-Leninism and the sincerity of the Communist Party of China. The process of re-educating myself called my entire educational history into question, and in particular, opened my eyes to the perversions of Marxism that have contributed to the Western left's ahistorical and undialectical analyses of China. One of the best resources that anti-imperialists in the West can use to understand this phenomenon is Western Marxism by the late Domenico Losordo. This book traces the bifurcation of Western and Eastern forms of Marxism and highlights the need for Western Marxism to rediscover the revolutionary core of dialectical materialism and be rejuvenated as an anti-imperialist practice. The Western Marxism that Losordo speaks of is not merely a geographic category, but refers to the commodified, chauvinist, and accommodationist form that is marketed by the academic presses and intellectuals of the imperial core as the best inheritor of the Marxist tradition, whereas Western Marxism is largely confined to academic critique and characterized by its defeatism, utopianism, and anti-communism. Eastern Marxism, on the other hand, found practical application in the anti-colonial revolutions of the 20th century and is still being advanced by the socialist states of today. I will now pivot to read a short excerpt from the appendix of Western Marxism, summarizing the main points of the book. In the West, Marxism was schooled primarily in condemning the destructive consequences of inter-imperialist rivalry and war, while in the East, the October Revolution found an extraordinary echo thanks to the call to the, quote, slaves in the colonies, unquote, to break the chains of oppression and national humiliation. In the West, the nation-state was the bloodthirsty Moloch that sacrificed millions of people to the greed for power and interests of big business. In the East, it was a question of shaking off the colonial yoke and putting an end to the genocidal and enslaving practices used by the great capitalist powers against the, quote, barbarians, unquote. In the two zones into which the world was divided, imperialism was experienced in different ways. There is no contradiction, but rather a full convergence between these two aspects. But have Western and Marxism ever met? Has the first ever really grasped the second? Since the initial difficulties and tragedies of the system that emerged from the October Revolution became apparent, but especially since the crisis of, quote, real socialism, unquote, became clear, the split between Eastern and Western Marxists has led to the fact that Marxists in power and Marxists in opposition, the latter increasingly focused on critical theory, deconstruction, and the condemnation of power and of power relations in general, are alien to each other. And so Western Marxism was born, which increasingly understood its distance from power as a favorable condition for the rediscovery of an authentic Marxism that was no longer reduced to state ideology. In Western left discourse, it's not uncommon to hear arguments that China is imperialist, that China has betrayed its revolution and restored capitalism, that it has turned its back on the global South, etc. Western Marxists have built entire careers criticizing actually existing socialism, most notably in the Chinese form, demonizing it as authoritarian, campist, statist, etc., while sowing confusion about actually existing imperialism. These are fundamental misapprehensions of China in the world we live in. Within the imperial core, solidarity with China is an embattled position against the Western left intelligentsia's reflexive anti-communism, rejection of the national question, and anti-materialist conceptions of imperialism. Marxists supportive of China are put in a defensive position from the start. These are the terms of discourse that bourgeois institutions have set for us and that we must refuse if an anti-imperialist Marxism is to develop in the West. In Western Marxism, Lusordo observed that the, quote, war that the United States is preparing for is against China, the country born of the greatest anti-colonial revolution in history and directed by an experienced communist party, unquote. As the PRC enters its 75th year of struggle under intensifying imperialist aggression, there should be no doubts on the left about China's role as a world historical progressive force, its socialist character, or the positive relationship between Chinese sovereign development and the growth of its capacity for people's war. Additionally, we must understand that Western Marxists' disavowal of actually existing socialism is a class position, and not just the product of propaganda or ignorance. When I look back on my experiences during Golden Week in China in 2019, I think of the ideological freedom and inspiration that I found in China. Outside of the suffocating atmosphere and nihilism of the US, I did not have to self-censor myself, preface discussion of China with critique, or dilute my enthusiasm for Chinese socialism. I would like to thank the Friends of Socialist China for organizing today's event, which has afforded me the same discursive freedom that I enjoyed in China, and for convening this group of panelists who share a commitment to reigniting anti-imperialist Marxism in solidarity with the PRC. Thank you.
Thank you all, and that ends our panel exposing imperialist propaganda. Arnold August, Lee Soo-hin, Arjae Red, Ken Hammond, Ju-Hyun Park, Chen Weihua, and Creighton Ward. Thank you all so very much. And our next panel can come up.